Strangely sitting here instead of over there. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and particularly the committee staff who have been working very hard on this bill. I'm Paul Goldstone. I support this bill and recommend that it be passed. I will summarise my submission and then take questions. I was a specialist in 19th century New Zealand history. I've worked on treaty issues in various roles, including here in Parliament. I currently work in the private industry. Obviously, my statements are my own personal views. I wish to make three high-level points. First is that the definition of treaty principles should be determined by Parliament. Treaty principles should not be some sacred mystery. Parliament should be able to clearly state what they are, given that Parliament created them. The concept of treaty principles was created by Parliament in 1975, but did not have any real effect until principles of the treaty were put into the SOE Bill in 1985. This was done by SOP at third reading without debate. As politicians, as MPs, I'm sure you have an understanding of what that really means. To the surprise of many MPs, in 1987, the Court of Appeal effectively interpreted this vague treaty principles to have an almost constitutional effect. Since then, Parliament has remained silent in defining the treaty principles it has somewhat haphazardly put into law, while the courts, the Waitangi Tribunal, public agencies and officials have somewhat enthusiastically sprouted various principles. What we have at the moment is that treaty principles are vague and are determined on an ad hoc basis by often unaccountable bodies. Leaving important political questions up to judges and the bureaucracy is Parliament abrogating its core duty and is not tenable. Principles of the treaty should be determined democratically through Parliament. Second, defining treaty principles in law. There are currently anywhere from between 3 to 8 various inconsistent and ever-changing principles developed by various bodies, government officials, courts, and the Waitangi Tribunal. It was notable that when two MPs from the same party spoke out against this bill, they confidently espoused principles that were completely different from each other. This buffet of principles is nonetheless used by government officials to determine policy. Employees or professionals in various bodies are expected to have a commitment to the principles of the treaty, or must take into account the principles of the treaty in their work or various applications. The treaty principles, I believe, should be founded on a reasonable interpretation of the three clauses in the two texts of the treaty itself. Broadly, these are sovereignty/kawanatanga, protection of Maori rights/tino rangatiratanga, and that all New Zealanders have the same rights. I have some reservations about the exact wording in clause 6, especially the second principle. I prefer the 1989 Labour government's articulation of principles, the principle of kawanatanga, the principle of rangatiratanga, and the principle of equality under the law. If the committee does not agree to these three principles, then what are the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi? I challenge members of the committee to put forward what they think are the principles based on the good faith interpretation of the two texts and put those into legislation. Third, I argue that defining treaty principles is inevitable when New Zealand becomes a republic. I appreciate that this committee will spike this bill. But when New Zealand becomes a republic, it will almost certainly be on the basis of, one, that New Zealand is a sovereign republic by the will of the people, and that all New Zealanders as citizens have the same rights and are equal before the law. And of course, I expect as a process it will be ratified by a referendum. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We've got a number of questions in line. I'm going to go to Ginny Anderson, then Todd Stevenson, then Tam Paul.
Thank you, Paul. I think I remember you from this place when I worked here too, a while ago. Can you unpack for me where this argument, from your view, about judges not having a role in our democracy? They do that every day. We make the laws, they interpret the laws on a multitude of cases on a day-to-day basis. Where does the ACT Party or your views, where does that arrive from, that in this particular space, that courts don't have a role?
Courts have a role in interpreting law, but where on fundamental political issues, it should be dealt with by Parliament, who, after all, are the responsible for making those laws. The role of the judiciary is to simply interpret those laws. What we've seen, though, is that because of the vagueness of this term, you've seen judges in other bodies, in particular in the public sector, just simply stretch out what this means, that are unaccountable.
So your point is that they still are a part of our democracy, but they are restricted to simply interpretation.
Of law. Yeah. But law comes from Parliament.
Thank you, Jenny. Todd, and then Tim.
Thanks for your presentation. You said that the current principles, so not the one in the bill, but current principles are vague. Some other submitters have said they're conservative or benign, and then you've said there's 3 to 8 principles. I mean, what is the consequence of actually not getting some definition around these principles for the country going forward?
Well, you end up with just complete confusion ultimately. I mean, there are simply no set principles. This idea that there is an established body of law around treaty principles, you simply have to go online and see for yourself that it's continually changing. And in fact, the fact that two ex-senior ministers couldn't even articulate what treaty principles work consistently with each other is an indication of the fact it's just confusion. Now, when government bodies are being asked to make decisions, when people applying for positions are expected to explain a commitment to the principles of the treaty and so on, when actually it's a moving feast, that's just not good.
Thank you, Tim.
So Paul, my question is, in your submission you've written, to claim that anyone by accident of ancestry can enjoy special rights is repugnant in any democracy, you know the rest. What makes it so repugnant? Because there are heaps of democracies that have special rights, whether it's language, race, religion. So what's so repugnant about New Zealand doing what is actually quite normal in other
I don't think
democracies?
it is normal. I think in most democracies it's pretty clear that you shouldn't have specific rights based on your ancestry.
But do you understand that other countries do have special rights based on things, not just race, also language and religion and a whole lot of other factors, that's normal?
I don't agree with that. I think in most Western democracies it's a standard principle that your political rights, particularly political rights, are completely not related to your ancestry.
Okay, I'll send you some links.
Thank you. Any further questions? Stark first.
Yeah, kia ora e hoa. I've just got a simple question. Do you think that Te Tiriti o Waitangi gives every person in this country the constitutional right to be here?
Yes, it creates the document that creates the government of New Zealand.
But does the constitutional right come from the treaty?
No, the treaty is the foundational document for creating the government of New Zealand.
But the constitutional right comes from the treaty.
Well, actually, the constitutional right for me to be a New Zealander is that I was born here.
Oh, I didn't say New Zealander. I said in the country.
Well, yes, if it's...
Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, folks. That's the time for today. So, Paul, just
I wonder if James purposely makes Takuta last just so the rings can be left running around.
Yeah. The thing I found weird about that submission is he took some left angle and some right angle, so some angles from Labour, and then the current bill, which I found really weird. It's like he's in two minds or something, even though he supports the bill. Anyone got anything to add to that?
You're on mute, Stacey.
Yeah, you picked it up, I didn't.
Honey, sorry, I was talking to Ray before, so I had to mute my microphone. Sorry. So what I was saying is that a lot of people who are for the bill seem to be speaking that way, like they're in two minds about it when they're making their submissions. But the point that I want to bring up is he said when New Zealand becomes a republic. Did I miss something?
I don't know. I mean, do we have President Dame Cindy Kudu?
Wow.
Instead of, was it a Governor General as the King's representative?
Wow.
Yeah, you missed it, Stacey.
Apparently so. I know I don't pay a lot of attention to the news because the news is painful, but come on, really?
Hey, listen, I'd like to throw something in that doesn't get any airtime, and it's actually the elephant in the room. The principles of the treaty, of course, are a fiction. And the position of the supporters of the bill is that they're not comfortable that the writing of that story is coming from the courts, and they'd like our political class to define them. But it doesn't change it that the principles are a fiction. And the only reason that we actually are forced to have recourse to principles is because nobody has the honor to actually just do what the words say. Mm-hmm. Right? That's the truth of the matter. If we steered clearly at those words and did what they say, there's no need for interpretive effort by politicians or judges. That's the real elephant in the room and the problem. Now, this fellow and the fellow before, I forget his name, Paul, I think, called it impractical. Really? The truth and justice is impractical. Kia ora for that.
And actually, something you mentioned on there, when there is a situation where the courts have declared a law inconsistent, the Supreme Court has actually been known to say, Parliament, you need to fix this up. And the most recent Supreme Court ruling was giving 16-year-olds the right to vote.
Boom. I don't know if you know this, but if you're a New Zealand citizen and right now, you can, if you are arrested for and imprisoned for something that places you in prison for over 1,050 days, you can't vote.
Yeah, that's correct. It's same with the Mental Health Act as well. If you've been under that for longer than 3 years, it's the same thing.
And if you're under 18 but over 16, you can get married, you can die in a war, you can get a license, you got to pay your taxes, but you can't vote. There are endless examples of differential rights for citizens that just makes a lie of it. Hey, just one last thing though that also doesn't get any airing from the supporters is that even when they're making the case for change, on what principle of justice does unilateral change make sense? Even if they make a compelling case for a need to change the terms, any agreement, in terms of natural justice means you both come back to the table and talk about it. Nobody on the support side ever says that it is a legitimate thing for ngā hapu o Aotearoa to be brought back to the table if there is going to be a renegotiation. Just another observation.
Now, before we get you to go, we need to cover this next one.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, News Guide, the Order Paper Podcast.